Hi guys, and welcome to this episode of Redbeardsworkshop. Now, you can probably tell from what I'm wearing that this is going to be a Green Lantern themed project. Now, ever since I was a wee little kid, like back when I was skinny and beardless, so a very long time ago, I was obsessed with Green Lantern. I remember my mom bought me it wasn't a comic book, it was more of a children's story book for the Justice League. And I remember the Green Lantern character, which I believe was Hal Jordan in that, was creating, baseball gloves out of this green energy. And being someone who loved to draw and sketch as a kid, it just looked so cool seeing these iconic, almost cinematic things on the page. And I fell in love with that character, that he could create anything he could imagine. Because as a little kid, I used to get very frustrated when I would try to sketch things and I couldn't make the paper look like what I had in my head. Probably because I have ADHD and I did as a kid too. But the idea of a superhero who could just create whatever he could imagine in his mind and just perfectly have it assemble in front of him, that was the dream to me. It was like your power was creativity. I have hundreds and hundreds of Green Lantern comics. Ignoring how terrible Ryan Reynolds' movie was, I am still completely obsessed with the character. I love Green Lantern, and I've always wanted to do some kind of art project for the character, but I never quite found something that was inspiring enough, or never had quite had the right idea. But now I kind of finally had a stroke of inspiration of something that I'm excited to do. So I was actually playing Injustice: Gods Among Us. I was playing actually the second version, and I love how you can really customize the character's armor and their appearance and their look. And it just struck me like it would be so cool to make some Green Lantern leather armor pieces. Now, I have seen somebody online do this, and they're much better leather crafters than I am, and their work is incredible. I definitely use some of what they've done as inspiration. I've used comic art, I've looked at fan art, I've looked at stuff from the video game, and I've sort of combined into several sketches of ideas that I had, and I came up with the idea of making a bracer, a Vambrace for my arm. So I have made leather bracers before. I used the patterns from Dark Horse Armory. Magnus at Dark Horse is an incredible leather worker, and if it weren't for him and Diesel Punk, Tony C, if I didn't watch their YouTube videos and look at their patterns on Etsy, I probably never would have gotten into leather working the way that I have. And I will put a link on my video to Dark Horse Armory's Vambrace leather pattern page on Etsy, because that is what I used to make my leather armor. So as you can see, this is one that I completed. I kind of came up with my own pattern for the background on it, and I use this in the Viking photo, which I will try to find a good version of and post in the video here. So I made this one, and then I wanted to make something slightly different for my second Vambrace, so it didn't look exactly the same. So I decided to make one without the extra leather piece on the front, just some carved work of Hugin and Munin, the two ravens of Odin. And then I added my own rabbit pelt to the edges of it. The one issue I have with these is that I am not very good at scaling PDFs or changing sizes. These are just a little bit too large for my arm. I decided for this one, I'm going to instead shorten up the pattern and remove some of this here so that it actually just kind of meets perfectly in that center. That way, if it is a little bit open, there is a little bit of space in between like that, you'll just see whatever I'm wearing underneath the black. Now, when you download the actual pattern off the Etsy page, once you purchase it, you're going to get pages like this that have the pattern on paper, and you cut the pieces out and you use those as stencils onto your leather. If you're going to do this, I highly recommend you get yourself some harder paper, depending on what it's called where you are. I've heard it called construction paper, project paper, Bristol board, just something tougher. And then once you've cut out your pattern, actually glue it to this tougher paper so that, it's durable and you can use a stencil later on. This one's about 3 years old and it's still in great shape. Once you punch out your holes, obviously your holes are going to be there ready to go for your next project as well. So This is the main idea here, where we're going to have the basic background of the pattern. We're going to use most of his design we're not going to use. We're just going to use the basic outline for the base of the bracer. And then I'm going to use a more medieval style kind of plate on the top here. And then what I'm hoping to be able to do is that the logo here, the Green Lantern symbol, I would actually like to install some type of bright light behind it. So when you flick a switch, the Green Lantern symbol glows in the leather bracer. So we're going to try to do that. And then all of these pieces back here are going to be patterned. We're going to use a patterning tool to stamp out a pattern in the background. Now, on the actual pattern, if you do purchase the pattern from Dark Horse, he does mention 12 to 14 ounce leather. Now that's incredibly thick. The reason he suggests that is because it's made for people doing combat sport. And if they're making armor for combat sport, it has to be able to protect you if you do take a blow to the arm or the chest or the shoulder, whatever you're using. Now I do have, I believe this is 10 ounce leather with me. So it's the thickest stuff that I have left. I don't have a ton of it left, but it's pretty strong, pretty durable. So I'm going to use what I have left here to make the base of my Vambrace. I do have some 5 ounce leather here as well, which is much flimsier, much lighter. You know, you kind of save everything. So I've got kind of thin and strange pieces cut out. I don't waste any of this stuff. I keep every scrap of leather because I'm going to use it for some kind of project at some point. So once we get the base cut out, I think I'm then going to use my 4 or 5 ounce leather here to do the overlapping pieces that we add on top. That way it doesn't become too thick and too heavy, but we'll use the thick stuff for the base. Now, if you were going to be making something that you're going to be selling to someone, I always suggest looking on the back and making sure that on the rough side of your leather you don't have any big gouges or pieces that if you're tooling on the other side are going to rip through and break. But you also want to make sure if you're delivering a product to someone that if they do look on the backside, it doesn't look like it's all torn up or ruined. Now again, with our pattern here, we don't necessarily want to just put something in the middle, because then the outside that you're going to have left over is going to be much harder to work with when you go to do your next leather project. You want to try to get it towards an edge to use up an entire section of that space so that you have bigger area to work with on your next project. So I kind of like what I got here. I'm going to trace this out so that we can cut it out afterwards. Now, because I don't want it to be moving, I've got a weight here, heavy piece of metal. You can use whatever you like to weigh down your object to make sure that your stencil isn't moving around too much. You can use multiple weights to make sure it lays flat. And when you trace it out, it's not going to move around and shift on you. Now, when you're tracing this out, you can use a pencil, you can use a pen, you can use a marker, whatever you're going to be able to see later on when you're cutting. It doesn't really matter that much, because if you're going to be dyeing your leather and you're going to be beveling the edges, that pen mark or pencil mark is not going to be showing up on the final project. I'm going to quickly make sure that I indent these stitch holes here for the larger piece we'll put on top. That way if I don't use it, no harm done, but if I do, the holes are all ready for me to punch out. Now these bigger 4 holes, those are going to be where we attach the actual buckles and straps to tie it together. So make sure you get that on both sides. All right, so we have the main part of our bracer sketched out onto the leather. What I'm going to do first is cut off a larger outline so that I can work with a smaller piece and not have this entire thing moving around on the table. And then once we get it cut out, then we'll determine exactly how much we're going to trim off the edge here to make it shorter. We'll wrap it around my arm and just kind of mark it off where it's going to be best. Especially with thicker leathers, it may take you a couple runs to actually cut through it. So when we're doing our outline, we're just going to go very carefully and make sure we do it 1 or 2 times. For straight lines, I actually like to put a ruler against it to cut to make sure that I'm not messing up my pattern too much. And for the rest of it, we're actually going to use the X-Acto knife to make sure that we're getting clean cuts and we can actually fit the contours and curves. Alright, so we have the main pattern here cut out. Before we cut any of the holes or do any of the punching on this, we're going to start wrapping it around my arm, contouring it here to make sure we get the right size out of it, the right shape, and we'll mark off where we're going to cut it. See, I like this. It's a lot closer. It still overlaps a little bit, but I can work with that a lot more than the amount that I had before. So it's a little bit better shaped to my arm personally. So what I'm going to do now is just punch out the holes to make sure that's done. And then we're going to cut out the piece that's going to go on top of here. I decided I do like that. It adds some thickness, especially if we're going to have a larger piece overlapping on the front here. Having another smaller piece overlap here is just going to kind of give the overall look more coherency. Alright, so what I've done here is marked off a space that's going to be visible on either side of the straps, so I know how much room I have to carve some details in there or what'll be visible beyond them. Next, I'm going to use a stitch groover to line up between the holes for the stitching. Putting this groove in the middle just allows your stitches to rest easier and not tear away or break or make holes in the stitching when you add them. I'm then going to use that same tool to actually put a groove into the outside of the leather and make a bit of a border around the bracers. I like adding this border to my armor. I just think it's a neat feature that looks pretty cool. Now I'm going to introduce you guys to what is a swivel knife. There are all kinds of swivel knives. They're named so because it allows you to turn the blade underneath your finger and swivel. There are some people who use ceramic blades. In fact, I've seen a lot of artists prefer doing that. I purchased a metal swivel knife when I began leather crafting, and I haven't had any need to replace it yet. Like most wood carving tools and leather tools, it is important to make sure that it's sharp when you use it to make sure you get a good cut. If you do try using it before wetting the leather, you will notice that it doesn't cut the leather as cleanly as you might like. So make sure that you do wet your leather and then wait roughly about 10 minutes or so before you either tool or cut into it. Now, as you can see on my other bracer I did here with Hugin and Munin, I really like this background tool that I used to make this pattern on this one. So I'm going to do the same thing on our bracer here. For anyone wondering why I have 2814 carved into that strap piece there, is because the space sector that Earth lies in for the Green Lantern Corps is sector 2814. So just a little nerdy bit of Green Lantern comic history thrown into the piece. Now, I had originally assumed that I was going to leave this top piece green, but I didn't quite like the way it looked. It didn't have that spark of imagination I was hoping for, so I decided to try using my leather paints to paint it silver, to give it a metal kind of look on the top. In the end, it turned out a lot better this way, and I'm much happier with it. I personally use the Angelus line of leather paints. They do adhere properly to the leather, and they remain flexible on your finished piece, so they can bend around. If you try to use acrylics, they will likely crack off at some point, and they may not even adhere in the first place. So here I'm just using a finishing agent on the edges of the leather, and I'm going to use a burnisher to kind of smooth off the edges. I also like to put some of this finishing agent on the inside of the straps. Not only does it smooth them out so they're no longer rough, but it also prevents some of the dye from seeping out if you sweat with the product on, or if it does get wet. And our last step before stitching and riveting the pieces together is to put both a Pro Resist and a leather sheen on our leather pieces. This both protects the leather from any kinds of stains or water damage, but it also gives it a nice shine to it, so it looks like it's in good quality for a long time.
Alright, so not wanting to bore you guys with all the stitching because it's quite arduous, we did get our plate on here, we got our hand loop and the wrist stitched in here. So what we have next in the stages is we're going to rivet on the keepers and belt loops over here, and then we're actually going to rivet on the belt straps on this side. And then the last thing we're going to do is put on the center plate here with rivets that I painted with a silver leather paint to make it look like metal. But before we do that, I do need to adhere the LED light to the back of it, and then it'll just tuck inside nicely. The battery pack will, once everything's made. So I'm going to show you guys how I do the rivets for a couple of them, but I won't make you watch all of them because it'll take too long, and then we'll move on to the LED light. It will be done.
Alright, so this gives you guys a basic idea of how you do rivets. Once you've put the nail through the pieces that you want, you're going to then take some cutters, cut off the remaining excess, but make sure you leave a little bit above the washer that you can use it to hammer down into a cap to press the washer down. And then you're just going to use your ballpoint hammer to flatten it out and then curve the edges down over top of the washer so it's nice and tight. Whew. All right, we are almost done. The very last thing that we have to do is we have to take our leather front plate of the brazier, which is painted to look metal with the sheen on it, which is great. I'm going to take some presentation cover material, cut it out in some form that works, and we're going to adhere it to the back of the front plate here. So it has this kind of like light, foggy, misty look. That way when we put our actual LED wire behind it, it kind of glows from behind that symbol. So once we get this adhered, I'm then going to figure out the exact pattern and shape that we want the LED wire to be. We'll put that on the back, and then we will take this and rivet this down onto the top of the actual bracer. And then we'll be done. I am getting this done tonight. All right, I've been working on this project for what feels like a month, and I am finishing tonight. So here's the tricky part about finishing this up. If I glue something or adhere it just to the back of this and it dries flat, when we do curve it, when we rivet it on, there's going to be an issue with this material either bunching up. And if I glue it like that, there's going to be a space. It may cause the outside corners of here to separate from whatever I use to adhere it. So I want to glue it on or attach it when it's curved. So I think what I'm going to try to do is get it on there with the adhesive and then put it on an angle like this. Wrap it around my mallet because it's already circular, and then use string or something around the outside so that when it dries on a curve already. I promised I'd tell you guys when I screw up, and guess what? I screwed up. So, I had never tried this before, but super glue does not stick to plastic very well, especially if it's rough. So what I ended up doing was taking some sandpaper, roughing down the plastic, and then trying contact cement, which is actually what I use to adhere leather pieces together. I tried that the next night. It worked out great, and we're good to go. And there it is, my Green Lantern bracer. This is the first time that I tried anything like this. It was very unique. I challenged myself, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. Some of the designs are obviously a little strange, a little odd, but for me personally, I love it. It's a combination of medieval fantasy armor and superheroes, which are two of the biggest passions in my life and interests that I have. I'm so thrilled with the way it turned out. And I also wanted to take this opportunity to thank everybody who has liked my videos, everyone who subscribed to my channels, and for those of you who have commented on the videos. Your support means so much to me. I've loved art since I was a little kid, and I've never really thought I was very good at it. So the fact that some of you have taken the time to encourage me and appreciate what I'm doing It means the world to me, so thank you guys so much for that. Please, if you like what you saw in this video, like and subscribe, and I'll try to continue to make some creative and interesting things for you. Thank you for joining along, and we will see you next time.